The question of being brings this into brings this particular concept into the civil debate, the debate in society. Who is a criminal, and how do you define criminality? But starting from logical arguments is a very good thing to do in defining criminality, and I think most of the achievements in a progressive agenda have primarily been because criminality and criminal nature and the definition of what can be considered to be criminal is approached logically rather than on the basis of beliefs and personal inclinations of the lawmakers and the rulers. The one thing I think everyone will agree with, the one point that I might make is that it is not acceptable behavior. It is unsocial behavior. It is uncommon and abnormal behavior. And given the right conditions, no one, if not pathologically inclined towards it, will actually undertake a life of criminality. But it is somehow uncommon. It is somehow rare and unsocial. It's very simple to understand, and I think most people will agree with that. So I have a new concept that somehow differentiates between what we understand to be criminal and associate completely with immorality and badness and evil, and what can be considered a more logical definition of what constitutes a criminal and his or her criminality. I think this factor is the distinction between being in oneself and being something for others. Sartre defined being in itself and being for itself. He differentiated between something that was conscious and something that was unconscious. But I think going a step further would be analyzing the existence of a being in a society of similar beings, all blessed with consciousnesses of their own. And given that platform of debate, I think we will understand that every individual in such a society of conscious beings will have two selves. One will be an idea of the self, what everyone thinks of themselves, what a being thinks of itself, and the other would be what is the image of a particular being in the minds of the others. How they reach upon this idea of themselves and others can be up for debate, can be different, perhaps even in different beings programmed differently, and we can idealize an ideal conscious being and then move our debate onto that in this regard. But at this point, I think this idea is very important to understand as a first principle that two beings will exist. And anything that can then be ascribed to a being will exist dually. If any value that exists within this field of dual definition exists, then it will be defined dually. For example, happiness can be defined by an individual for itself and can be defined by other people for an individual. For example, a human being might think he or she is himself happy, and other people might think that someone else is happy. And these two dual beings will then have to understand the kind of discord between them. And we will, in our philosophical analysis, understand that there is a discord between these two beings. So, if we have to define any attribute of an individual, sanity, insanity, happiness, sadness, virtue, vice, then we will also have to define it in terms of both the dual selves. So, criminality also is one of those things, I believe. So, the criminal can be either a criminal in oneself or a social criminal, a criminal that others think is a criminal, that others think has committed a criminal act, and a criminal who has this belief that he or she himself might have committed a criminal act. A criminal in one's own eyes, in distinction from a criminal in the eyes of other people. And I think criminality and insanity will become one and the same thing when this dual attitude towards the being is undertaken as a principle. Because a criminal, in one's eyes, will only be a product of his or her circumstances in the eyes of other people. And similarly, a certain individual who considers himself insane in his or her own eyes will be considered a criminal and completely to blame and in the right mind when he or she might have done the act by other people, the jury that sends him to the chair or something. So that is what we have to understand. Criminal insanity is not something else. Criminality is insanity. We don't use them interchangeably because our idea of the duality of man in oneself compared with society is very sketchy. Once we understand that, we'll understand that the criminal exists dually. So there are two kinds of insanity. One is an individual's own insanity, and it might or might not become what is considered criminal by law. And the other is social insanity. Well, other people would consider that particular man to be insane, or other people might consider a particular man to be of a certain disposition that he might commit something that an insane man would do. Looking through the glass of this new differentiation, I think we'll understand that when someone commits a criminal act, it is unsocial, antisocial behavior, and that behavior, in the eyes of that person himself, will be an act of insanity, an act of loss of control. In the eyes of others, might be an act of complete sanity and blame, and vice versa. In that case, I propose that all criminals be only treated and not mistreated, that all criminals be sent to sanatoriums and not to jails, because punishment is not something that you would give to an insane person just because the idea of duality of being is sketchy in the minds of the commoners. The law must be so created that philosophically it is very, very sound. And this philosophical soundness, I think, will come when we understand the duality of self.